So now we come to the Western Ghats, yes, with Robin, who will tell us about birds. Robin is from IISER Tirupati, and we hope that he will do a lot of work in the Eastern Ghats now.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here, and I'm happy to have you all here at IISER Tirupati and to be talking to you all about some of the work that we do. I'm going to just bring together a few sets of data that that I'm very excited about. This is probably just the second time that I'm trying to put this together, so I'm happy to hear from you if there are any gaps of logic that you see. So this habitat that you see here, there are a few things that I'd like you to take away from this. The first is that this is the Western Ghats, the highest elevations of Western Ghats. That's the Anemudi peak that you see there. The other striking thing about this image is that you can see two kinds of habitats here. One is the grassland, and then you have the forest. And the important part is that both are natural. So people have done, they've dug cores. In fact, Professor Sukumar from IISc was one of the people who led that idea. And they find that grasslands are natural here. It's not because of deforestation. So there are some parts of the landscape that are occupied by forests and some that have grasslands. So this is an important part, and it'll kind of become clear as we go further ahead. I want to first, right up front, acknowledge that a lot of this work was led by Meghna Natesh and another student, Vinay. And then a bunch of PhD students came along and contributed to various other parts. And finally, Rais, a BSMS student, has kind of put in a few important parts to the story that I'm going to present. So my group primarily works along four themes. First is this part about the vegetation or habitats, and then bird evolution and biogeography, some of the kinds that Uma was also talking about. But I also focus on bioacoustics, bird song, and how songs change and behavior. And finally, citizen science and outreach is also something that we've been kind of dabbling with a little bit. So the first thing that I want to kind of explain here is what is a sky island. I think everybody knows about the idea of what an island is because it's area, any kind of landmass that is isolated by ocean usually. But in case of sky islands, these are mountain tops, and they are actually isolated by valleys where the climate is different. So it's the climate, not the oceans, that separate one habitat from another. So one mountaintop from another is separated by the valleys, which have a very different kind of climate. Okay, and how important is this? The proof of that is in the Western Ghats. You have these, the mountaintops are in the dark color in the map, and you have different species on different mountains, and each are about 1 million or so years apart. And this one here is the Palghat Gap that we were talking about in the questions before. And that's, that has led to a differentiation about 5 million years across the, in these species, okay, across the Palghat Gap. So just to kind of tell you that the forest birds in these landscapes are isolated to these mountain tops. And I spent my first 2 years of my career actually walking up and down these mountains. So that's from 2000 to 2002, and 550 kilometers or so of transects. And you don't find these birds below 1,200, 1,300 meters. So at that time, we didn't have genetics. And that's when I kind of met Uma, and then we kind of, we got the story together that there is this isolation for millions of years across these mountains. So these are like islands. So these mountains are like islands where there are many species. So that's the starting point of that idea. And climate is what separates these islands apart. What's also interesting is that grasslands are also, they have their own unique species. For example, this species, Nilgiri pipit, is about 7 million years old, which means that that part of the habitat was also occupied by a unique kind of fauna in this landscape. So you have forest birds, grassland birds, endemic, found only in these mountains, separated by climate. So coming to climate itself, what these two figures, these maps show is that this time called last glacial maxima, I think everybody's heard of Ice Age, especially movies and things like that. So that's when there was a lot of ice formation in especially in the polar areas. What very few of us know is that in the tropical parts, ice never reached us, but it became very dry. Okay, so we didn't have ice, but the habitat generally became drier at this period, and this was the maximum aridity that was seen in the recent past. Okay, that is the 20,000 years back. So the question then is that we have this landscape which has forests and grasslands, and we have this constant fluctuation of climate, especially in the last 2 million years or so. And this data comes from cores, sediment cores, that people have shown this globally, that climate has fluctuated quite drastically over time. And what about India? We know that globally grasslands have kind of expanded at the LGM, which is the LGM is what is this Ice Age, okay? Yeah, that's India there. And what you can see is that most of that habitat is, most of India was grasslands at Ice Age. And we again know this with soil cores from all of these areas. I just want to make the point that at LGM, it is generally known that there are a lot of grasslands in India, in the Indian landscape. And at this point, I want to introduce another idea to you. So in ecology, actually, there are very few rules, because there's always an exception, because there's so much heterogeneity and so many factors that come into play. But one interesting rule is this idea of what makes habitats. And there are two very interesting variables. This is called the Whittaker plot. And what it basically says is that temperature here on the x-axis and precipitation, the rainfall, a combination of this can tell you what kind of habitat is found anywhere on Earth. Okay, so you can predict, let's say, evergreen forests or any other savanna or other habitat very easily by just looking at temperature and rainfall. So essentially, one climate implies that you have one habitat. But then you have this exception, which is this Shola habitat that we looked at first, which is that you have one climate, but you have two habitats. You have forests and grasslands. So here's an interesting paradox, you can say, to this rule. And what I'm interested in is in trying to understand how birds have kind of coped with this two habitats, and how have things changed over the past climatic changes. And so here are all the actors in some sense. We have the forest birds and the grassland birds. They are and we now know that forest grassland mosaic might have changed over time. And this is a rough model that I started kind of putting together in 2011, and with a lot of discussions with Uma at that time. Idea is that as climate changes, as you go from wet to arid to wet again, wet to dry, so the highest point of aridity is the LGM or the Ice Age, and that's when you think the population size, let's say, of grassland birds should be the highest, because we know that grass should have dominated the landscape. But then, because you have this forest grassland mosaic, then you would think that the forest should have declined at that point. because if the grasslands have expanded, grasslands have contracted. And you would find this kind of, it's almost like the forests are expanding, grasslands are contracting, and the grasslands are expanding, and the forests are contracting. At least this is the model that we had in mind. And of course, there's one more component to this, which is that depending on the ecology of the species, depending on how specialized you are to the habitat, your amplitude of change would kind of vary. Okay? This is a little bit complicated idea, but I'll get to it in a little bit. It was in 2012 that there was this really cool genomic tool that came up called PSMC. And what it does is that from a single, this was primarily described from human genetic studies, where based on the coalescent theory, the idea, I collaborated with Nagarjun Vijay for this. And essentially, you can determine population size changes just from a single diploid genome. And primarily, it's coming from information of heterozygosity across the genome. So in very simple terms, I won't go through a lot of the details, less heterozygous, lower the NE or the effective population size. And more heterozygous it is, the higher the effective population size is. And you can get an idea of the change in effective population size. And this is the way that this data is represented. That's the past, and this is the current time. So it goes from the past to the current, and if population size is here on the y-axis. So you can see populations changed. There's an increase and there's a decrease and so on. So that's what we are going to be looking at. The first project that we did was kind of a proof of concept. This was led by Meghna again. And this really showed us that at the ice age, one of the species, the open habitat species, this was across 2 owls. One species increased exactly at around LGM, while another one showed a slightly different trajectory. So we thought that, okay, so now we have a method where we can actually kind of hit the Shola Sky Island species with this method. And we wanted to kind of sample as much of the community as possible. So this is the bird community of the Shola habitat. Many of these species, especially the ones with the orange stars, they are endemic to these mountaintops. So they are not found anywhere else, mostly on these mountains. But there are many other species like, let's say this, the bulbul that you would find widespread. They are found in large parts of the landscape, but they're also found on these mountaintops. Okay, so this is the community that we're looking at. Once again, to kind of simplify the idea, we want to compare forests and grasslands, but we also want to compare the specialists and generalists. Okay, the species that are highly adapted to these mountaintops, and some that are not, some that are found widespread, found everywhere. And we would think that their responses might be different. And that's where this factor comes in, where the responses are slightly different. So we kind of assembled 45 genomes at various depths, essentially we are looking at effective population size over time. Yeah, I won't go into the details of that. But there's one thing that I do want to just briefly mention, and this is this cool idea of trying to establish how much of a specialist is a bird, and how much of it is how much of a generalist it is. Okay, how specialized is a specialist, and how much of a generalist is a generalist. And we did that by running these species distribution models, essentially plotting things like, let's say, the same temperature and precipitation axis, but you can see how much of the area does a species cover. So the more climatically specialized the species is, the smaller that area would be that a species covers, right? And if it is found across, let's say, large parts of the landscape in India, then it would cover a variety of climates, and hence that that volume, that niche volume, would be much larger. So that's what we calculated for every species that we studied. So this is just a graphic illustrating the same thing. You have restricted species on the mountaintop. They should have very small niche volume. And species that are found as you go from the mountain and you go further and further down, you should see that the niche volume that they occupies is larger and larger. So they are more generalists. Okay. So that's the overall idea. And what did we find? Remember, we are looking at generalist, specialists, and forest and grasslands. I'll walk you through this. Essentially, what we find is that, so first the left corner, the grassland birds, the generalist grassland birds seem to show the pattern that we had thought would be found, which is that there is a big expansion and decline and so on. But the forest species, especially the specialists, showed no change at all. They were kind of consistent all through time. And the strange part was that the grassland specialists also showed no change. Okay, so this was really surprising to us. But strangely, again, the forest birds, which were widespread, they did seem to show some change in population sizes. You have to remember that most of these end at about 10,000 years. So it doesn't tell you much about the recent past. It's all from about 1.5 million to now. So essentially, some ideas are supported, but some are not. But the cool thing that I think that we did was that Meghna calculated this fold change, let's say, trying to understand what is the amplitude of change, which is the minimum to maximum, how much is the change actually there in this population size. And what she found was that as the niche volume increased, which means that as you become more of a generalist and you occupy larger climates, your amplitude of change, the demographic change, is more. Okay? So essentially, if you're a climate specialist and you're on mountaintop, you don't seem to be changing too much. You're in a climatically stable place, yeah, and your population size is also very stable through millions of years. And that's what this shows. And that is irrespective of whether you're a forest bird or a grassland bird. Okay? So that's quite interesting. I just want to say that we don't have very clearly discernible trends with timelines, that it doesn't completely match the LGM and so on. But that's a problem that we are trying to deal with. However, we simulated the data, which is that you can say that the population, what if the population changed from such to such, and then you create the genome and then push it into this PSMC analysis, and we are able to recover the same patterns. So it's not an artifact, but there may be a few other things that we need to do to figure out what exactly is happening. So the main thing seems to be that we have some partial support of our big model, and it is that ecology of the species seems to kind of determine the response to historic climate change. Yeah. And mountaintop specialists are stable over time. So remember, I started with this idea that we have one climate but two habitats. But what we seem to be recovering is that even if you have one climate and two habitats, one climate is resulting only in one response. So birds are responding to the climate, not so much to the habitat. And that's really interesting. And my personal, what I really think is happening is that it's driven by clouds, because mountaintops have, especially the tropical mountaintops, get most of their rainfall from clouds. And clouds are known to be stable, through time. So it's the stability of clouds that seems to be, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. So very quickly, the second part of work that I wanted to talk about was how this landscape has changed So this is just an illustration that shows that you had the forests and the grasslands, and then during colonial times, we went and planted some timber trees in it. This is like acacia and eucalyptus and so on. And this went wild because they are invasive species, and they started to cover up to 70% of a landscape just over recent time. This is in a few 100 years. And although that was an illustration, I just want to say that we have a lot of satellite imagery and other data to where we have quantified this change that has happened. So over about 6 to 7 years, a couple of students have put in a lot of work and surveyed the entire landscape for certain species of birds. And to summarize what they have found, what they find is that as you go from the wooded habitat to transformed habitats, which is these invaded habitats, some of these forest birds, forest specialists, seem to actually occur all the way into these invasive new habitats. It's only the grassland birds that have declined in this habitat. So now you have to try and remember that I told you in the previous part that the forest birds were all stable, that their population sizes did not change. But I'm giving you an example here for contemporary time where we've gone and planted some invasive species, and forest birds have kind of exploded even up to 70% into that landscape. And we have not recovered this in PSMC with that particular method. And that's where Rais, our BSMS student, came in, and we started using this another new tool which lets us estimate population demography in more recent times. Okay? And this is with one species that we know quite a lot about the ecology, the Sholicola or the shortwing, the species that I studied quite a lot. And we know the landscape quite well now. So this is a Shola, what we imagine it to be, forests and grasslands. But if you've been to Ooty or some place like that, you know that large parts of the landscape have changed. Humans have kind of taken over the landscape. So any would have decreased in this. There's timber plantations, and I told you that birds are there, so any would increase there. And tea plantations, again, any would decrease because you would have reduced the land, the land available. So these three configurations for this one species, I'll quickly tell you. High wavies, where the forest is kind of cut like a cake. One side has tea estates, and what we find is that there is a decline in recent time. Here the x-axis is kind of calibrated to time, so you can read the, sorry about that, but you can see that there is a decline, and then Kodaikanal, where you have both establishment of a big city, and you also have invasive species coming in the 1970s. And very interestingly, we are able to recover both the human habitation led decline and an increase with the timber plantation. So this was really, I was really thrilled to see this. But actually the biggest surprise was this part of the landscape, Berijam, which is near Kodaikanal, used to be a beautiful grassland in the 1970s, and now it's fully wooded. And you can see that the NE is actually increased dramatically over this time. So we are actually able to kind of recover with genomic tools some of the landscape changes and our ecological data that we're collecting on the ground. This data is quite fresh, just a few weeks old, and I'm quite excited about it. And I just want to say that the way ahead is to actually expand this data to other species and geographies, and especially link this ecology and evolutionary processes together. And just to give you a brief glimpse, we've now started collecting data across India. Many species show that different populations are kind of synchronous, but in some others, different populations of a species seem to show different trajectories. Perhaps they are responding differently to climate. And that is very informative because when you have some species responding in a particular way and some others, it might give you some more insights into what a species is adapted to and so on. So in summary, essentially, I talked to you about the Shola Sky Islands, and I like to kind of think of this as this forest grassland mosaic where when one increases, the other kind of decreases and so on. But in essence, what I've shown you is that birds are actually responding not just to the habitat structure, but to the climate. Yeah, and and we've been able to kind of recover some of this demography and demographic changes with genomics, which I'm quite excited by. And I hope that this is going to throw up a lot more questions, especially with comparative genomics. So yeah, thanks. I'd like to kind of open it out to questions if you have any.
Very interesting, I'm sure. Yes, Parth.
So I'll make a few observations and some comments. Number one, the Whittaker plot always seemed to me to be too artificial. Habitats are continuous and it's very discrete. What Whittaker plot comes up with is a very discrete habitat. That's a comment. The second is that you're talking about these specialists and generalists which are found over widespread habitats. You probably, now that you have genomic data, I suspect that if you look at these specialists, you would find the impact of natural selection on the genomes much stronger as opposed to the generalist. And so that would by itself be an interesting thing to look at to relate natural selection, the impact of natural selection on the genomes and their habitat selection. The other point that I also want to make is that as you're looking at these Lee-Durbin plots, there's a major assumption there, one of neutrality. So if there is a huge amount of natural selection on the genomes, these will not give you good estimates of any.
Good point. Yeah, thanks. I mean, I completely agree that there are limitations to what is possible with the PSMC kind of plots, and agree that we need to kind of look at it a little bit deeper, especially the specialists and generalists. We are hoping to do a little bit of that. Thanks for that.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for that very nice overview. It was intriguing to see, but perhaps expected, that many of these birds are responding to climate, which is a larger biogeographic scale factor, than habitat, which is a small scale. But I was wondering if the results are consistent across, say, different gills. So, for example, if you have frugivores and they have nothing to eat in grasslands, what about frugivores versus insectivores in terms of their response to habitat? Is that something you looked into?
Yeah. So this, the habitat response in general seems to be better at the local scale rather than at the larger scale. Somehow, the climatic responses are better captured at the evolutionary scale. So the way I look at it is that the climate provides the bigger envelope, and then the habitat features come in, and which is why you have these species kind of moving into novel habitats as they are created. As long as it is happening in the same climate space, they are able to kind of move into this newer habitat. So sorry?
Maybe refugia.
Right? Yeah. So definitely the forest refugia part is definitely there, and it's expanding from there, but over a shorter period than over at the long term.
Just to follow up from that, so she was talking about insectivores versus frugivores. What would you expect omnivores to be? So if you were to look at feeding gills, that might be an interesting way.
So feeding gills in terms of historic demography does not seem to have that much of an impact. That is what I meant to say. But over the shorter time scales, that is where there seems to be some stronger impact. Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah, so Robin, really nice to see all of this coming through after so many years and discussions. Not that it took long, but a lot of discussions. I'm just curious, NEs are very high. I'm just curious about
why that might be. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
I
So
mean,
there's a lot
one
of
thing is that-
variation in, but there's not a lot of variation in genetic diversity between species?
So one thing is that we looked for, because we already had a lot of background data, we knew we were looking at habitat, I mean population structure,
Right.
We looked at relatedness, we looked at many of these things, but despite that, this is what we have, this is where we are.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the big problems is to kind of connect any to actual population size,
Right,
which
right.
is,
Yeah.
you know,
But
it's
the-
really,
yeah.
so I have no handle on how these relate.
Sure. The other thing is that basically I don't know, it seems a little counterintuitive because at least from paleontological data, we always expect that generalists with large distributions are more stable, right?
Yeah.
But you're showing that specialists are stable.
Yeah. So I think this is a very, it's a peculiar case of mountaintop specialists, because a lot of the core data also shows that on mountaintops, the climates have been stable and the forests have been stable. So it's not that it's not a generic specialist versus generalist. It's a climate specialist, and it's the climate specialist that survived on these mountaintops. That is what is stable, and which is why we have these birds which are 5 million years, 7 million years old. The oldest lineages of birds are on the mountaintops. They are not anywhere in the lower elevations, because I think the lower elevations got impacted by a lot of fluctuations of climate. So there must have been more extinctions and movement of species from other places and so on.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Robin.
Yeah, thanks.
Very good.